a few months, just so as we can get those in our mind. 71.5 million required for the Ruataniwha, and that's stated in the business case at the moment. It included assumed dates of drawdown for council funding. It acknowledged that the cash received from HBRC dividend payments is an important element to fund council's operating budget. It agreed in principle to negotiate with Napier Port to secure the increased dividends, and it acknowledged there would be tax losses in the early years that could be used to increase dividends to council. Current status of where we are on these dividend projections, advice received from HBRC. This material was included in the council paper at the 16th of April, so I'll just go over it briefly again. Discussions were carried out by HBRC and Napier Port during 2014. The assumed council funding would be required at the end of the construction period. At that time of the negotiations, it was considered that the largest drawdowns for council's input into the Ruataniwha would be towards the end of the project, to 2016-17, and we'll come to the implications of that assumption being changed. The special Napier Port dividends negotiated, and that table shows you at the moment the status of the special dividends currently being negotiated between HBRC and Napier Port. And this is over and above the base dividend flows that Napier Port moves through HBRC to council. In the year 14-15, there was a special dividend flow of plus 700,000, 15-16, 1.1 million, and 16-17, and then subsequent years a figure in and around 4.2 million. And this basically covered 6% on the 71 million, as in the Ruataniwha business case as put forward by HBRC. Yeah, next one. Okay, the Ruataniwha business case delivered to this council a few months back indicated the revised timing for the cash flows. The quantum didn't alter, but the timing was altered, and there was a change in the cash flow requirement to an earlier requirement, and we're all aware of this. Most of it is believed to be needed on 14-15 and early 15-16, although those dates will move around, as you're aware. HBRC business case also indicated to council that these early drawdowns would have an impact on council's operating budget, and we'd had discussions with HBRC on these issues. There was at that time a dividend shortfall, and that is included in that paper. 14-15, there was 400,000, and 15-16 about 2.7 mil. It's important for council to note that these figures will reduce because the gap will get smaller because the financial close is being pushed out. So these figures, whilst I want you to understand them in principle, will move about. Okay. So the next one. So I thought I'd put up there what the status of this shortfall in the dividend, so as you can just get that through your mind. The council paper on the 16th of April that staff put to council recommended that council borrow for the shortfall and on loan it to HBRC, so as HBRC could increase the dividend flow back. And it was acknowledged in that paper that in 18-19 there would be substantial Ruataniwha or cash flows from the Ruataniwha that would allow the repayment of that loan. Council resolved at that meeting, though, that HBRC should consider borrowing to provide the funding, and if required, council would provide a guarantee on that. They also resolved at that meeting that HBRC continued to negotiate with investors regarding the timing of the drawdowns, and the implication of that was that if council didn't have to put it in earlier, then of course this gap would be smaller. So I mean, you can see how you as council have approached that, and that's the current position on that funding. My last overhead there is a quote from the statement of proposal, which is out there and consulted on under the paragraphs impact on rates. We've got this council is structured as proposed investment of 71.5 million to be accomplished without requiring any support from the rates income, and therefore no rates increase would occur in the future as a result of this investment. This will be achieved by distributions from HBRC derived from other investments to meet the cost of the funds for the Ruataniwha investment. And the last one, any requirement for investment over the proposed figure of 71 million in the in the HBRC plan up to the 80 million as proposed in the long-term plan will only be made if HBRC is able to meet the cost of funds of the additional investment. The same terms already applies to the currently proposed 71. That went out into the statement of proposal, and you'll all be aware of that. And that's it from me, I believe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Funding questions. It's been fairly clearly explained a couple of times now, but no questions. Thank you, Mr. Due diligence.
Mr. Chairman, so this is the final slide, and this is really around, I guess, part of the concern that's been expressed is what happens next. How do we have further input into it? How can we be satisfied that what we're potentially agreeing to today is actually going to be delivered? And so I really just wanted to highlight for you the due diligence process that's yet to take place. That will be undertaken by HBRC. And in your papers, there's a letter from the Chief Executive of HBRC advising that, and also attached to that is the scope of the due diligence process. So it will include technical matters such as the ones I've listed up there: geotechnical, hydrological, capital costs, for example, construction, etc. It will also look at insurance issues, at legal issues, and that's where the review of all the final versions of, or potentially final versions of the documents will take place, land ownership and taxation matters, as well as a review of the financial model. So HBRC is undertaking to carry out due diligence on all those once the information is known, and as I said, our legal advisors will be part of that process, and then the whole output from that process, you've already indicated that you want that reviewed by Deloitte, and so that will be the final step in the process from a council input perspective.
Thank you. Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you, Mrs. Lambert. I have a question for you. Are you satisfied in your capacity as Chief Executive of the Regional Council that we have received all the information that we need to be seeing today to be making this decision?
Yes, I am.
On that basis, I'm prepared to move this motion when you're ready for it, Mr. Chairman.
Could it have those few extra words added on 8?
On 8, the suggestion from Councillor Bevan. There'll be more questions, no doubt, but when we get to the, I note that, and I will come back to you. But any other questions? Councillor Barker.
On the, as part of the information gathering exercise to see whether these things will work, there was a report done by Costella, as I recall it, which was to estimate the rate of uptake that there would be after the commencement start. So there was a high and a low and so on. And this work by Costella was based on elevated levels of nitrogen in being allowed to be released into the Tukituki River. The Board of Inquiry decision has severely restrained that rate. Now what I want to know is, will we get a report from Costella updating what they expect to be the uptake rate given the final decision of the Board of Inquiry? Because that was critical to how the numbers worked in the case that was explained in short term to us.
Castalia.
Castalia, that's it. It's Castalia.
The short answer is no, you won't get the report, but the long answer is that will inevitably, or a review of the assumptions underlying uptake and how that links into the decisions that come out of the Board of Inquiry, will be a part of that due diligence process that will be undertaken by HBRC, and so the outcomes of that are what will come back to you.
Councillor Belford, did you have a
just to follow up, I just want to make it clear, I'm asking that the updated Castalia, based on the final decision of the Board of Inquiry, be part of any information pack we get. Must be.
You're asking that. Councillor Belford.
Was added, yes. Let me just read a sentence from the Castalia report as it is, which underscores why Mr. Barker's question, I think,
and then you'll preface it with your question and then read it.
Well, would you not think that their current assessment would suggest they need to do a new assessment. Their current assessment is a total of 48% of respondents reported they have either optimized their farm already, do not have the capacity to manage an irrigated farm, or have land or land use that will not benefit from irrigation. So when they wrote their initial report, they wrote off 48% of the prospect pool. It would seem that this question has merit, that with more adverse circumstances, this is a review that would need to be undertaken. Is that not correct?
Councillor, I'm not disputing the need for that, the assumptions underlying that, and indeed the information in it to be reviewed. What I'm saying is that it won't be council that will be doing that. It will be HBRC as part of their due diligence process if they feel that they require it.
Councillor Scott.
Mr Chairman, the Castalia report was produced as part of the investigations as to whether to proceed with this. We now have a condition precedent, which is actual uptake. Surely that's what we're concentrating on, the condition precedent?
Well, it's actual,
Yes,
isn't it? And if
yeah.
we don't get it, it doesn't happen.
I mean,
it's quite simple.
It's no point now in revising reports as to expected anything. It's now in the area of moving to decide whether, subject to conditions precedent, and the condition precedent is real. There is uptake or there isn't uptake.
And there are conditions on that.
Mr Chairman, I was asking a question.
Order, yeah.
Is that what that condition precedent is?
Well, the condition precedent is around a minimum threshold for uptake by water users who will have to assess their needs and their ability to be able to use water in light of the planning framework that's in place.
Further questions? Councillor Barker.
Yes. In the recommendations, it notes that Deloitte confirms there are no circumstances under the current business case where HBRC could be called upon to fund returns for other equity investors. In that sentence, I assume, is based on the Castalia model of uptake subsequent to it. What I want to be assured is that that advice from Deloitte is accurate in the future, that once we get past the 40, if we get past the 40 million cubic metres, that all the protections they have for returns future are going to be met. Now, my concern is, just to outline again, that we had assumptions based on a favourable resource consent at elevated levels of nitrogen. If we have a Board of Inquiry decision which has much restricted levels of nitrogen, and this has an adverse effect on the uptake, then I think this council needs to know what that is, what the projections for that are, and what the outlook is for income returns over the term of this project, so that the undertaking given in Deloitte may not be real in those new changed circumstances.
So, Councillor, the recommendation that you read out, recommendation 4, was a noting, which indicates that this is the you're noting that Deloitte have confirmed that the information they've based their independent peer review on is on the business case. What the remainder of, well, not all of this, sorry, from 8 downwards really, that those recommendations acknowledge that there are still some unknowns as part of the package of the whole project, and that one of the requirements is that we will get an assessment or peer review, whatever you'd like to call it, of the final information or the due diligence process output undertaken by Deloitte, so they can then incorporate the new information into their process then, and obviously if there are changes or whatever the circumstances of the final Board of Inquiry decision, they will be able to incorporate that into their final review.
Question?
I go on then.
I get all
Have
of
your
that.
third question.
I get all of that, and I accept that Castalia was commissioned by HBRC. What I want to know is that how can this council request HBRC to update its Castalia report in the light of the new circumstances based on the Board of Inquiry's final decision? It's not Deloitte's to have it. The Castalia report was commissioned by HBRC. It wasn't commissioned by HBRC. Deloitte cannot review things which have not been commissioned. And it seems to me that the Castalia report is fundamental to how the numbers run subsequent to the start of it, as this project starts. I want to know how those numbers will run in the light of the new model.
Well, HBRC will have to undertake, once all the information is known, HBRC will have to run that exercise. Whether or not it's a review of the Castalia report or some other review of the assumptions that underline that report and ultimately underline these recommendations and including a recommendation to invest. I strongly doubt that HBRC would proceed until they themselves are completely satisfied with exactly the points that you've raised, and you can and can then pass that information on to council.